From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Julia Carr-Katzel. It's Monday, May 8. Disposable vapes will be banned under a major crackdown by the federal government, with Health Minister Mark Butler calling it the biggest loophole in Australia's healthcare history.
Big Tobacco has taken another addictive product, wrapped it in shiny packaging, added sweet flavours to create a new generation of nicotine addicts.
The emphasis will be on, quote, the people selling, with tougher border controls, policing, and millions of dollars invested in nicotine cessation support programs.
The import of vapes for sale in retail settings will end.
But this isn't the first time we've seen the government attempt to curb vaping. So, will the new reforms be enough to stop a new generation of vapers in their tracks? Today, federal health reporter for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Natassia Chrysanthos, on Australia's vaping problem. So, Natassia, can you tell me just how bad the vaping problem is across Australia right now?
Yes, I suppose if you look around, you can see them everywhere. I find walking around the streets of Sydney after Saturday night, like there are vape packets on the ground, there are discarded products in the gutters, kind of smoking groups at the front of bars and restaurants these days are more vaping groups than they are smoking groups, and I think that's really changed in the last couple of years. So you're looking at convenience stores, petrol stations, tobacconists selling them under the counter. They're available in a range of different colours and flavours, and that's where you have people talking about, you know, the fruity flavours and the bubblegum flavours. Like there are huge ranges and they're generally very brightly rainbow coloured. Teachers for the last couple of years now have been talking about finding vapes in the toilets.
On his young son. It follows a playground vaping session at a Geelong primary school.
I think the New South Wales government has recently made or is looking to make some kind of investment in detectors in school bathrooms.
Australia's top schools are taking extreme measures to stop an alarming rise in student vaping. New vape detecting technology.
So there's a lot of anecdotal data from parents and schools, but the best indication is probably latest research published in the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Public Health, which came out last month. So the researchers surveyed 1,000 young Australians. They found 1 in 6 teenagers between 14 and 17 had vaped, and a quarter of 18 to 24-year-olds had vaped, and 14% of that group were current users of vapes. Now, to put that in context, the rate of daily smokers among 18 to 24-year-olds is about 7%, so it's double that.
And Natassia, what's the consequence of all these young people vaping? Tell me a bit about the adverse health effects we know about.
Yeah, sure. So the real long-term consequences at this point are pretty hard to know because it's only been really rampant in the last few years. But there is concern that, you know, the recurrent inhalation of chemicals will do significant damage to particularly underdeveloped lungs and bodies of teenagers and children. They can contain the same harmful chemicals found in cleaning products, nail polish remover, weed killer or bug spray.
People who vape are exposed to more than 200 chemicals, many of which can be damaging.
The Information Centre reveals the shocking number of kids being exposed to toxic vape chemicals. More than 140 children under the age of 4 have been exposed.
They can leave young people at an increased risk of depression and anxiety. The nicotine level in one vape, because it really varies because they're not regulated products, can sometimes be as much as the nicotine content in 50 cigarettes, according to New South Wales Health. And that's something that young people really don't know when they're inhaling these products.
Not being able to breathe, I haven't been able to take a deep breath in so long.
So I'm having a hard time breathing, which causes the wheezing, which causes the chest pain, etc.
And just in 13 hours of not hitting a vape, I already feel like I can breathe better. My head does hurt really fucking bad, but...
So there's kind of connections to lung disease and long-lasting effects or damage on the brain and physical development.
Okay, quitting vaping update. I am on my 3rd day without hitting any nicotine whatsoever. Obviously, it's a little embarrassing to be proud of not hitting a fucking vape for 3 days, but I've never made it this far.
I feel like I'm at war in my body. My throat hurts, my head hurts, I'm craving it. I'm really hungry. I'm fucking crying.
These stupid things have almost ruined my life. And as a health coach, I especially know how terrible these are for you and how much I should not be doing this.
And the other concern that a lot of researchers and health groups have is that vapes have been shown to be a bit of a gateway to cigarettes as well. And cigarettes are obviously, we really know the health effects there.
Yeah, and just on that, because at first vaping was introduced as this alternative to smoking or a smoking cessation tool. So tell me about how the promise of vaping has not materialised.
Sure, and I think it is important to note in all of this as well, harm reduction experts still would really prefer that smokers use vapes. You know, they say that vaping is still a better alternative than inhaling tobacco and cigarettes. And for many people who are lifelong smokers, vapes have helped them turn away from cigarettes. So there is a legitimate kind of case and use there. But I think the key giveaway is in the marketing, really. When you look at the colours, when you look at the fruity flavours and the lolly flavours, these aren't products that are designed for a 50-year-old smoker trying to quit smoking. They're products that are designed to appeal to a new generation and particularly young people. So I think that's what the concern is. And you can see it in the products. They're no longer primarily in the realm of smoking cessation. They are a kind of recreational device. And the big tobacco brands, so Philip Morris, British American Tobacco, Imperial, they've all got their own vaping products. So the tobacco companies have moved on from cigarettes to create these as well. So they've become a really marketable, appealing product, and they are pitched at an audience that goes beyond your kind of smoking cessation use.
And young adults really don't have any chance, do they? If the amount of nicotine in one vape contains the equivalent of 50 cigarettes, you know, that's highly addictive and they're incredibly hard to quit. So what we have instead is this whole new generation addicted to nicotine, as the Health Minister would say, and young vapers who have never smoked now are more likely to take up smoking cigarettes. Well, but the government did try and curb this a few years ago, didn't they? So in 2021, former Health Minister Greg Hunt introduced some reforms. Can you tell me how that went?
Yeah, sure. So Greg Hunt, former health minister, and Mark Butler are really on a unity ticket here. Like, they've both been health ministers that are very anti-vaping and they really don't want to normalise vaping in Australia. And it's clear that that's something that's really important and kind of a personally held belief for both of them. Greg Hunt had a situation where he was coalition health minister. There were several people in his kind of party room who didn't agree. So he really fought tooth and nail to get those reforms over the line. And what we ended up with was a prescription-only model, which is a unique model for Australia. So the idea was that you would be able to buy vapes, but only with a doctor's prescription, and all retail sales were made illegal of nicotine vaping products. So it's worth noting now, in this black market bootleg situation, you're not supposed to be able to buy or sell vapes in a retail setting. They are currently supposed to be restricted to chemists. But there are a couple of legal loopholes. So, for example, these rules really apply to nicotine vapes. But if you look at the products that are being imported, these individually packaged kind of single-use products from China, none of them say they have nicotine in them. So you have a situation where if Border Force does intercept, for example, a suite of these vapes, they then have to go to the TGA, ask the TGA to check whether they have nicotine content, and then they either release them to the importer or seize them. Authorities have to go through all these hoops to actually seize them and ban them. And you'd really need to ramp up your numbers as well, because there are tens of thousands of these products coming in. And then because there's not strong federal action at the border, there's been reluctance from states to allocate their resources to policing in shops and such, which is why you do have situations, and it seems quite ironic, but you have a store that is openly selling vapes right opposite a police station in some parts of Sydney and Melbourne. But the states haven't allocated those resources there to cracking down either. It's become a bit of a buck passing issue between state and federal governments. And then the other issue in terms of where you'd say this model has failed is that this prescription model was supposed to set up an avenue for people to purchase vapes with a doctor's prescription, but there's been really poor take-up of that amongst doctors in Australia. So if you're there wanting to find a doctor, there aren't many to choose from. And I think Butler said last week only 1 in 20 doctors actually prescribe them. So this has also created a situation where if you are a smoker who is wanting to turn to vaping, it's actually much easier for you to just purchase a product down the road at your convenience store than going through all the legal hurdles to get it through legitimate means. So I think those two factors, both weak enforcement and then difficulty in the legal channels, have been two factors that have really let this black market situation get out of hand and led to the failure of the previous model.
We'll be back in a moment.
Hey there, I'm Osman Faruqi, host of The Drop, a weekly culture show from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Every episode, I'll be breaking down the latest in the world of TV, film, music and pop culture, with the help of some of the best writers and critics in the country. Sometimes we go deep.
There's a thrill in seeing what's meant to be private out publicly.
But mostly, we have fun.
I love her asking Logan for a selfie and saying, congrats on the deal, ka-ching!
And there's never been a better time to start listening to The Drop. Right now, we're breaking down every episode of the final season of Succession. Follow The Drop with me, Osman Faruqi, in your favourite podcast app.
Okay, so Federal Health Minister Mark Butler proposed new reforms last week in an effort to stop this black market operating. What are the new proposals and how are they different from those introduced a couple of years ago?
At that age, I'm not quite sure whether I need these glasses or not. Increasingly I do, though. Thank you, David, for that introduction.
So there are quite significant, I suppose, tightening of the import situation. So now you can only import nicotine vapes if you can demonstrate to the Therapeutic Goods Administration that they're going to be sold only through a pharmacy on a prescription and that they comply with new standards. So for these nicotine vaping pharmaceutical products, there's a new suite of standards that they have to comply with. So they include a restriction on flavours and colours.
Present that way. No more bubblegum flavours, no more pink unicorns, no more vapes deliberately disguised as highlighter pens for kids to be able to hide them in their pencil cases.
They have to come in pharmaceutical-like packaging, so you'd expect the packaging now to look more like packaging for a medicine than you would for a pink vape. And there will be limits on the nicotine concentration in the product and volumes. And then the other really significant thing is a total ban on single-use vapes, or the disposable vapes, which are what essentially being sold in all the convenience stores.
We tend to accept the TGA's advice and ban single-use disposable vapes that clog landfill and have become toxic to our environment.
So again, when you see one of those coming in those little packages that you see at the convenience store counters, whether it's police, whether it's Border Force, it's an instant signal that this product is not allowed in Australia. So it should streamline that process. And the other key change, I suppose, to the model is previously how I was saying that doctors had to be an authorised prescriber to give people a prescription for vapes. Now all doctors are going to be able to do that. So it is supposed to take away one of the hurdles for doctors.
So that all doctors can write a script for those who really need it. Governments will also
so it's I suppose improving both of those factors we talked about before as being a real hindrance to the efficacy of the previous model and trying to fix those as a first port of call. And Butler's also said he's potentially open to selling vapes in pharmacies without a doctor's prescription, just in consultation with a pharmacist behind the counter. So some of those things are still going to be worked out, but I guess the key pillars of the reform is stricter enforcement, police and border force, strong controls on what the standards are for products, and easier for people to obtain products through legal channels.
Okay, so while the government is going further than the last set of reforms, do you think they'll have any effect or do you think the black market will continue to thrive?
Yeah, it will really require strong cooperation between the Commonwealth and the states, and that's where some of that buck passing we talked about before as well won't help, or if this is going to work, that'll kind of have to end. And I guess this is the question that people have about prohibition. Like you look at drugs, you look at illicit drugs, illicit tobacco. Obviously, those things are still prevalent in Australia. Whether strong action will at least bring down the prevalence of vapes and the ease of access to vapes and thereby reduce access among school children, maybe. But, and this is the other point that some behavioural experts have raised over the last week, if we are successful in making vapes less available, but people who are addicted to nicotine or want nicotine still want that. Cigarettes then become the obvious answer. And there is a real caution around this having a perverse effect, which is you make vape so much more difficult to access. And it has an unintended impact of sending people to tobacco, which is even worse for their health.
And just on that point, you know, I can't help but notice how deeply ironic it is that the very thing that was supposed to help people stop smoking is potentially now the thing that will create a new large cohort of tobacco smokers and introduce smoking to those who may have never picked up a cigarette in the first place when we're thinking about the younger generations. What's the government said about that?
Well, so this is where Butler is also raising the tax on tobacco. So there are going to be 3 5% hikes in the next few years, which will take, the government says, an average pack of 20 cigarettes will go from $38.75 this financial year to about $48 by 26-27. So that's a $10 increase. And that's part of Butler's argument. Well, we're also going to make tobacco less appealing and more unaffordable. And that's where he's also then put in that pharmacy caveat and said, you know, if people do want to access them, there still might be easier pathways still. However, there's the question, what happens when you're on a night out and it's 10 p.m. and you want nicotine and there's no pharmacy open, but there is a vending machine with cigarettes at the pub you're at. So we shall see.
So just lastly, Natasha, Mark Butler said that we have the education we didn't have back when cigarettes entered the market decades ago, right? And basically how we have a chance now to stop this from getting any worse. I mean, what are the stakes and what happens if we can't stamp this out?
And I think that it's a wise and reasonable point that Butler makes.
And so the difference, I think, between vaping and cigarettes is that cigarettes have been with us for so long. You know, if we knew now, back then, when cigarettes were being introduced, I would hope that governments would have stopped it, would have snuffed it out immediately, which is what I want to do to vapes. You know, we have
I think health-wise, in terms of longitudinal health impacts, it is still hard to see, but yeah, I think health authorities are right in not wanting this to go down the same path as it did with tobacco and then being faced with all of these unknown health impacts for millions of people down the track.
You know, we have a closing window here before vapes become so widespread, so accepted, so normalised that it would be very, very difficult to take any action. But I'm still confident that the thing is...
But many people say the horse is bolted. They are everywhere. They're entrenched in the community. They're entrenched globally. There's a lot of big money behind them. It'll be interesting to see how long this takes, and then it'll be interesting to see if it has a discernible impact. We'll see.
Thank you very much for your time today, Natasha.
Thank you.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by me, Julia Karkatzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Julia Karkatzel. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.